My dad was known for his body sense of humor and his kindness, which is accurate, but he was more than that. He was an artist who was interested in capturing people's stories. He spent his life chasing the next perfect shot and loved to share his experiences from around the world. He was a father who wanted to protect all three of us from the world as much as he also wanted us to experience all of the good that we could. When I was little, my parents were the giants that made my world. And in my memories of them together, I can see these snapshots of these two people who shaped me. One of those is walking into our kitchen and seeing my parents with their arms around each other. It was the first time that I saw them as who they really are. Two people who were crazy about each other and supported one another. Back then they were a team, and I knew in that moment that their world started and ended right there together. I can't talk about one without the other. I grew up sitting in the passenger seat next to my dad, talking about everything from life to love while he chauffeured me across Tidewater to minimum wage jobs and the government school. That's when we connected the most. We would listen to Emerson, Lake and Palmer while he vented about work and shared stories from his outdoor childhood out west and told me the story of how he met my mom and fell in love. That it was by chance through friends and how he asked her to marry him over the phone. The ring sent in the mail to Pittsburgh. I could see all the stories in my mind as he told them. He was his most honest when talking about that. He never gave me the sex talk. Instead, he said he married his best friend and it was the most important decision of his life. My parents are two complementary pieces that fit together. My mom is the organizer and the planner, and my dad, he was the visionary and the morale. When I had struggled to believe in what I'm doing, it's been my parents and especially my dad who believed that I could figure it out. He was the first person to teach me about composition, giving me a little camera to walk around the neighborhood with, and upon delivering my pictures to him, he would point out how the camera will see things versus how my eye does. He trained me at a young age in the rules of threes and how to capture candid moments. He also taught me how to stand by my work, how to put my name on something I was proud of, and to show up even when my anxiety really wanted to get the better of me. Another snapshot, my dad has just come home from Kuwait. I watch him unpack in my parents' room and listen to him tell stories about the open air markets and this leather jacket that he almost bought. He believed that experience and connecting with people was worth more than just the stuff. In 1998, when I was 12 years old, he and mom sent me off with a group of kids to the United Kingdom for a month. As a 38-year-old now, I realize the bravery within that, and I don't know, I'm just grateful. Losing my dad has been one of the hardest things that's happened to me in my life, but at the same time, it's also taught me things. My dad continues to remind me how strong I can be, how loved I am, and he's never going to stop teaching me, even after he's gone. He lives on in the dirty jokes that I tell, in my sense of humor, in the way that I met and fell in love with my own husband, my best friend. I miss you, Dad, and I love you, but also, thank you.
I met Bryan Barbee in the Navy. I was coming in from USC and checking into the command, and I'd heard Brian's name before. He had gone to SC the year before I did, so Bryan was he was our go-to guy for me anyway. I mean, for television, he had prior experience before the Navy and TV stations and stuff, and you know, my transition from film to video was rough, and Bryan was there to help out, and you know, with the answers, he got out of the Navy a year before I did. So as I was getting out of the Navy, I called him and I said, hey, let's have a beer or something. Let's get together. And, before I leave I was going back to California. And he said, well, just come over to the house. I said, Carol's pregnant. And that's when I first heard of it and of her being pregnant. And he said, well, she's going to just rest upstairs and we can just watch our movie and hang out. And I said, well, that's great. Everything was fine. So we had a couple beers and we watched the movie. And then he says, well, where do we slide over to my little watering hole here? And, I could tell there might have been something on his mind. And I said, so we were having a few drinks and he said, Carol and I are best friends. And I said, we've had life, we've had our independence. And I said, we're a little, he was a little concerned that they might lose that independence. And I said, well, you will. I had 2 kids at the time. So he's kind of, looking to me for advice. And of course, I've had a couple drinks, so I'm not much of helping anyway. So I can't help myself but have a little fun with this. I said, this is like this, Bryan. I said, you've got this screaming blob of meat on your arms, and you don't know if it needs to be burped, if you need to change it, or it's very frustrating. It's the only saving grace that the darn thing looks like you. So he saw the humor in that, and over the years, we kept in touch. So about 4 years in, I think it was like 3 or 4 years, I called him and I said, how's everything? And we compared notes on our careers and things like that. And I heard the kids in the background and they were playing and, and they're, and he said, hey, you get off, don't jump on your sister and don't get on the couch. And, he's just going, the typical family stuff. And I said, well, how's this family thing going for you? And he goes, Dana, I said, I'm so happy in my life right now. I've never been happier. I said, I love these kids. I love being their dad. I love, he just loved life. And over the years, as we've kept in touch all these years, and it's never without, bragging about his kids and the artists that he was raising, he was so proud of them and very much in love with his family life and Carol. And it's really cool. Let me tell you, I really miss not being able to pick up that phone and just saying, hey, what's going on? And, even if it's a bad day or a good day, whatever, just bullshitting with my friend Bryan. I miss him.
Hi, this is William Nanny. I worked with the Bryan in the early 80s. We were working with the Marines on Vieques Island in Puerto Rico when we charged uphill. He wanted to shoot the camera. It was old-time umbilical cord between the camera and recorder, and he was a recorder and sound man. He wanted to shoot. So I said, okay, here you go. And he looked into the eyepiece and said, the battery light's on, you asshole. And I died laughing. But he was a great friend, great shipmate, and I will miss him.
Hello everyone, my name is John Diditis and I worked with Bryan from 1982 to 1984. The first job I went on with Bryan was just after I graduated Mopic Sea School, and that job was Ocean Venture 82. The crew consisted of Bill Nanny, Bryan, Jeff Herberger, Mike Drake, Kathy Russell, Wes Pedersen, and myself. Ocean Venture 82 was a 2-part exercise, the first part being an evacuation of the civilian community from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The second was a Navy Marine Corps landing exercise on the island of Vieques, Puerto Rico. Bryan was signed as the primary shooter, and I was his sound man. And although I was his sound man, Bryan did allow me to shoot and provided me a lot of great pointers on how to make my shots better and more interesting. I'll always remember Bryan as being a very kind and generous person, and I know that he is sorely missed.
I met Bryan in 1982, and we were both assigned to Fleet Combat Camera Group in Norfolk, and we worked together for a couple of years. And then he left, got out of the Navy, went to work at Channel 13 in Norfolk. And a few years later, we stayed in touch, but a few years later, he knew I was getting out of the Navy, and he called and said, "Hey, you might like it down here. Why don't you come down and apply for a job here? It'd be great." And so I did. And they hired me, and I started when I got out of the Navy in '86.
First met Bryan out on a job I was with Channel 13, he was with Combat Camera. And it was really one of those days where a lot of young people shooting, and most of whom I didn't know in the military. A few of the old boys and ladies from the other stations. But Bryan asked me a couple of questions about the camera gear. And then I noticed that he had something that was better than what I had. And I asked him about it. And we kind of had a little friendship develop. But we left that afternoon. We parted company, and a week or two later I heard from Bryan. He wanted to come into the station, have a look around, and so he came down, and then a few weeks later we received an application for, he was getting out of the Navy, and so he sent me a video, a resume. And the resume included $5, which was supposed to be for sending the resume back, which we didn't do. We spent the $5 down at the romper room, or whatever the equivalent was during that period. Several cameramen, they know who they are, were also in on that one. But we did recommend him to Dave Goldberg, the news director, and Dave hired us, let us hire Bryan, and that was the beginning of a great relationship for so many of the people in this room, and I'm just glad to be part of it. Navy Christmas. Bryan used to take care of that program like nobody could. He put everything into it.
I really got to know Bryan when we went on the first Navy Christmas show back in 1986. John Wessling, Bryan, and I went over to Italy to put that show together. Didn't know what we were going to get into on the first trip, but when I got home and saw the end result, what Bryan had done with the opening, oh my gosh. He took the Nutcracker and weaved shots of the flight deck around the music to the Nutcracker, and it was a holiday show, just fitted perfectly. I was moved to tears watching what he had done.
Bryan was an artist, and his paintbrush was the camera, literally. He would have a shot, and just that single shot would tell you an entire story. So I believe he used his video to tell complete and full stories, and then he went into the editing booth. Oh, and when he went into the editing booth, he made it sing, completely made it sing.
Harder as a chicken.
Our favorite was, I got a hold of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which is one of Bryan's very favorite groups. We got to tape it. We got to sit backstage. We had dinner. We went to the whole concert, stayed up half the night with the boys. So his heart and his soul was in that. And you can see how much he loved the group when you watch the video.
I remember Bryan, just when I got to know him, just being this gentle giant and with a heart of gold. And for some reason, I always felt safe around him and protected. He was just just such a warm guy with a great laugh. And I don't know if it's this way in other newsrooms, but I know at Channel 13, we were always a family. And good or bad, you always have good days and bad days with siblings. But we were always a family, and we always looked out for each other. And Bryan was a big part of that. On Valentine's Day in 2001, my husband Meyer had a heart attack. And it was an interesting time. And Bryan had this cup made for him. He called it the Davis Cup, which of course is a tennis tournament. But he had this made for Meyer. So this is 30 years old now, and Meyer still has it. It's a nice memory of Bryan, that he did something kind for Meyer.
When I think of Bryan, I think about all the laughs we shared, the incredible stories he would bring up, and his details are just impeccable, unlike anybody I've ever known. His humor is unbelievable, and alongside that is his incredible talent. His photography, videography, and editing is unmatched to anyone I've known. He and I worked closely together on the latter years of the CHKD telethon, and he would edit with me for hours on end, and he would just make magic happen. He would create these reenactments like a Hollywood movie, and he really made something out of the little visual that we had, and made it look spectacular. Finally, Bryan and I shared the love of music, particularly progressive rock, and we went to many concerts together between Rush, ELP, and Yes. And I'm going to go crank up some Rush after this, and salute you, Bryan. You will be missed, and we love you.
I have a lot of great memories of working with Bryan Barbee when I was at Channel 13. From going to lunch at Dog and Burger and sliding across the back seat of a whale with every curve we took, to drinks at White House after work. Bryan was just a great guy. And I just started working at the station, and I got a news assignment for a promo comparing the price of school lunch to the price of prison lunch. My concept was I would have a kid, my son, play the student, and I needed a convict. I hadn't been at the station very long, but I was looking at Bryan and I'm like, you would be so perfect for this. And but the question is, how do you ask him? Somebody you barely know. So I just did. And Bryan laughed hard. That Bryan Barbee laugh, and you all know what I'm talking about. And he was just like, sure. His only request was that he got to write love hate on his knuckles. And he was one of the best talents I ever worked with, and just an amazing guy. I love you, Bryan, and I'll miss you forever.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kevin Johnson. I worked at Channel 13 starting in the early 90s, all the way to about 2002. And Barbee was my mentor. He taught me so many things, I can't even list them off. He was still in news when I started, and I watched all of the cool stuff he got to do and the amazing ways he shot it. And I wanted to be just like him. He went off to do production, did some amazing stuff in the production department, and I was, impressed by what he did back then too. He taught me cool things to shoot, ways to shoot it. I remember doing a Navy Christmas project, which was one of those I emulated him and followed him and did what he did because he was cool. And I remember coming back with footage, and he had his production suite up on the second floor and did some amazing stuff. And he found gems and stuff I shot that I didn't know I shot. So he was an amazing storyteller and a more amazing friend. He told stories like you wouldn't believe. And I'm sure throughout the day here, you're going to hear many of these stories. So I won't repeat the famous DUI checkpoint story and going up the escalator story, and I'm sure there's many others. I miss him very much, and all the best, everybody.
Bryan Barbee was just one of those great guys that everybody at the station loved working with. He had a huge heart. It was great. Everybody loved him for his great ability behind a camera, but he also was a great storyteller. And it was kind of funny how all of his stories always started, me and my buddy Phil. All of his stories had me and my buddy Phil in it, which was kind of interesting. One funny story I have for you about Bryan, in the early 90s, Bryan and Sheldon Ingram and I were out in Virginia Beach covering a court trial, and they broke for lunch. We all went down to the street to a barbecue place and ate like crazy. And we come back to the production truck. We're sitting in the truck waiting for the court to begin again. And the next thing you know, all three of us fell asleep because we ate too much at the barbecue joint. Bryan, you will be missed.
Just like Bryan, I'm not used to being on camera because I also worked behind the scenes. But here I am. For many years, I had the honor of working with Bryan on special projects, including Sweeps Pieces and Navy Christmas. I was very impressed not only with his talent, but also his kindness, his candor, and his wonderful sense of humor. He made my job as a producer easy, and I learned a great deal from him over the years. Fast forward to November 2008, I was going through a rough time after my fiance's mother died, and a few days later, I was involved in a very serious car accident. Bryan called during my recovery to see how I was doing, and I really appreciated that. And shortly before my wedding, on June 6, 2009, he heard that my photographer unexpectedly canceled, leaving me in a bind. But just like Bryan Barbee's style, he offered to step in and save my special day. He became my wedding photographer and didn't even want to charge me, but we insisted. We stayed in touch all of these years, and Bryan also shot some beautiful family photos for us. Bryan, you are greatly missed, and I will forever cherish our friendship.
Greetings from Nashville. I'm Mike Lewis. Sorry I couldn't be there with you all today, but I appreciate the opportunity to take a couple of minutes and share a few thoughts about Bryan with you. Several things I remember most about him, and if this has been discussed already, forgive me, but one of the things was his laughter. It was awesome. Phil and I worked together out in the field, and many times, we would save material that we shot in the field that would never make it to air because we knew that we could get Bryan to laugh at what we saw. And we would take him up in the production booth and show him this video in hopes of getting him to laugh, because the laughter came from his toes and it was absolutely infectious and wonderful. The other thing was, shortly after I went to work at Channel 13, it was my birthday, and how Bryan found out it was my birthday, I have no idea. But he gave me a video cassette, black and white, mind you, a black and white video cassette of the movie Mean Streets. Bryan and I had a couple of conversations. My question, I knew that he went to film school, and I thoroughly admired how he did his job and the take that he had on various things. And we had conversations. My question to him was, why can't you get the dynamic colors in video that you can in film? And I think that question, just that I would ask that question, seemed to impress him, because we buddied up after that. And thus, the black and white video cassette of Mean Streets. He said, if you're interested in film, you need to take a look at the cinematography, because it's among the very best. So that was kind of cool. And the other thing was a very small incidental thing, but for anybody who was on air, it was a big deal. I didn't know it at the time. But Bryan had the chutzpah to be able to say something to somebody that he thought they needed to know about or hear. Thus, this example. So the same time he gave me the cassette, he also said one more thing. He said, this right here, it needs to go. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the unibrow thing needs to go. You need to take a razor, separate the two brows right here, it's not a good look for you. I said, what? The Navy guy, the hardened photographer is giving me cosmetic tips that the $1 million consultants never gave me or never said a word about. But Bryan had the guts to come up and say something to me that was uncomfortable, but he knew that I needed to hear and would help me. And I was always very, very grateful for that.
Bryan, Mike Gooding, and I went to Europe for Navy Christmas, and we were in Naples, Italy, Rome, and Spain. And while we were there, we had some downtime in our shooting schedule, and we got out around the town a little bit. And one occasion, Bryan was on my balcony at my hotel room and overlooked the intersection in Naples. And he described it as the Daily Miracle. And he narrated it, I filmed it, and it is just hilarious the way he narrated this episode of Traffic.
Here we are in Naples, Italy, watching the Daily Miracle. No one runs into anybody. On the left in the blue car, Guido Sarducci. Guido looks left, looks right, makes his move, hits his horn. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, at the Daily Miracle Part 2, Part 2A. As the Neapolitan commuter tries to get home without getting killed. There we got two Vespas going at each other at full power. They just barely missed.
What's behind me is not important.
What's behind me is not important.
While we're in Rome, we're wandering around the city. We've been walking for an hour or so, trying to find Trevi's Fountain. Roll reverse, Bryan has the camera now, and we're looking for Trevi's Fountain. We must have looked for a half hour, and we finally found it.
Here we are looking for Fontana di Trevi. And Phil is looking at the map.
I'm looking for...
And I'm looking at the sign that says Fontana di Trevi this way.
And I'm looking at a guy with a camera who's a broken
Fontana di Trevi this way. I say it's over here. This way.
When I think about Bryan Barbee, I can't help but think of all the fun we had. We were in San Diego, we were in Chicago, the many, many times in DC, but one of the best was when we went to New York to cover Pope John Paul II. We went to Europe one time, to Spain and to Italy to do Navy Christmas holiday salute, but our best times of all were at the General Assembly, in the basement of the General Assembly building, where we had nothing, I mean nothing but fun. I am really, truly gonna miss that guy.
Thinking about the homecoming, we were very grateful to Dave Goldberg for that one. He introduced us to this piece of music from Hey Good Hardy. Cameramen all seemed to enjoy the challenge. Bryan did really well with the homecoming because he was so at ease editing. He had an advantage over the rest of us because he could edit so easily, so quickly. He could look at pictures and images and put them into order. But again, the mastermind behind it all was Bryan Barbee.
So I'm Catherine Barrett, and I worked at the station as a reporter and sometimes anchor from 1982 to 2008. I came to know Bryan when we were put together to work on stories out in the field, mainly when he was a photographer. I think he started a couple of years after me at the station. And then that grew into working together when he moved into production. Upstairs, he would work on beautifying and adding his artistry to the special projects that I was working on.
There are 4 helicopters on the hospital.
I came back from covering the war in the former Yugoslavia. I was at a Combat 10 hospital in Zagreb, Croatia. One of the side pieces we did for our series of reports was going with the corpsmen we were covering to an orphanage in Zagreb. And, you know, it's a tough story. And I expected the video to be just, well, it wasn't what I expected. There were shots of children, but they weren't really long enough to do anything with. They didn't move you. I took it upstairs. This when Barbie was in production, I took it upstairs and said, you know, what can we do with this? What can we do? And he turned what was a real big challenge to make a piece out of into a work of art. There wasn't enough footage of each child, so what he did was still frame them, and I don't know what the technique was, but kind of made them look like a painting, and it was absolutely stunning. Barbie not just saved the day, but he really saved that series, and it was gorgeous.
One time when we were in Charlottesville, we passed the hospital where my son died. And I went to pieces. He stopped that news truck, got out, yanked me out of the news truck, gave me a big hug, pat me on the back, going, "It's okay, old girl, it's all right." You know, nobody quite like him.
Talk about family. Bryan would bring up Carol in the edit suite, or I'd hear Genevieve's name out in the field, or right in the truck. I'd hear Carl and Daniel's name. He was not a distant father by any stretch, and guys, you'll be glad to know your names came up often with my guy.
Well, he went from the newsroom to doing commercial production. And I think the lives that he touched, all of us in the newsroom and the people that he worked with, he had such a passion about his work, and he had a passion about his family, and I felt like he had a passion about all of us. And he took his work to another level, and I think it was just so evident in all the video that we saw of him. And I miss him very much.
Bryan would remember things about stories that we did together, and I didn't even remember the dang story. And I always thought, you know, one of these days I'm going to get him on the phone or actually drive to Chesapeake and just hang out and just talk about, pick his brain about the things he remembers. And you know what? I didn't. And I really regret that, because from a selfish point of view, I wanted to have that in my memory bank too. So, lesson learned. Lesson learned. Reach out, do the things you want to do. Do them now.
Bryan, buddy, I'm going to miss you. I love you. Beyond your work, your legacy will be you and Carol raised a great family. And I'm going to miss you. We're going to miss you.